Hi, my name is Philip Harris. I'm a freelance illustrator and I'm going to take you through how to draw a tree. So here I found an image of a tree that I really like, so I'm going to use this as my reference. And I've got a couple of materials that I'm going to work with here. I've got a 2H pencil, and then we've got a HB mechanical pencil, putty rubber, and then we're going to be using a G-nib dip pen, and we've got the Raw Inklingner black ink. So with this one here, I'm using a Bristol paper, 250 GSM. So I'm going to start with the 2H pencil and just start sketching. Generally I work from the top of an image down, but you can work in any way that feels comfortable to you really. Just draw the silhouette and don't focus on too many details. And you're just trying to get a feel for the shape of the tree as a whole rather than looking at the individual branches or anything like that. When you start a drawing, it's quite easy to jump in and look at the detail too much at the start. It's really good just to think about the overall shape. And another good tip is to break things into simple shapes. So for the trunk, just doing a simple long shape like that just gives you a feel for how the trunk would look. Where the roots start to wrap around here, you can break that into a shape there. And you're just building up shapes. And then I'm going to start looking to plan out some of the branches. So just looking for where the tree splits. Once you've got the overall shape, you're just starting to add more and more details and build up on that sort of base layer that you've got. Because I'll be working with ink, it's really good to get your sketch, not perfect, but to a level that you're really happy with before adding ink, because there's no going back once you get the ink involved. So I'm just kind of adding in where I think I want all those branches to be, just getting a feel for the shape of it. So I'm just going to start adding in some of the leaves now. But I'm just going to do them as sort of blocks of cloud, and again, not get too caught up in kind of the details of them at this stage, just sort of planning out where they sit on the tree. Okay, so I think now I'm happy with the sketch. I'm going to just start to plan out where some of my dip pen line work's going to go. So I've just got the mechanical pencil here, and it's just slightly darker, so you can start to think about where you want to start putting shadow. So if you look at sort of the gaps between the tree, it's a really good way, just using that negative space just to see and get the proportions right of what you're drawing. I don't want it to be an exact copy of the tree, I just want it to be a sort of representation. So I think I'm going to move on to adding ink now. So I've got my G-nib here, which is a really nice nib. You can get really diverse lines with it. So I'm just going to start outlining the structure of the tree with this. With this, it's always good to start working from left to right if you're right-handed, because the ink takes quite a while to dry and you can quite often end up smudging your work. The dip pen's a really nice tool to use because you can go from sort of really thin lines to really, really thick lines just by applying pressure. It's good just to play with pen and ink and not even try to draw anything, just get used to sort of the way the medium feels. It is definitely an adjustment to getting used to it. At this stage, I'm just sort of looking at the outline of the tree and just honing down those elements that I want to keep. It's good to just kind of really pinpoint where all your outlines are. I'm going to use these to add in the shadow later on, and also once I've done that I can kind of rub out the sketch lines and get rid of all of that. Being aware of how much ink is on your dip pen nib is a really good thing to be aware of, because if you dip it too deep and then you'll get a really full nib and then it will end up bleeding all over the paper, so that is definitely something to be aware of. I'm just adding the edge of the trunk there, sort of refining the sketch line I had, so just if I think it's slightly different, just correcting where the line goes. And I'm using quite a lot of pressure here, so that's giving me quite a thick line because it's quite a substantial sort of structure. And then I'm just going to add in just a few of the rocks down the bottom there. So I've just finished the outlining now, so I'm just going to give the nib a bit of a clean. You can do this at any point that it gets too clogged, and then I'm just going to let it dry completely before I go in with the rubber and remove the sketch lines. So I'm just going to put my hand just gently on some of this drawing, just to see if any of it comes away, and then if it does, it's still wet. But I think we're all good, and I think it's dry. So I'm just going to rub out those sketch lines, clean everything up, and give you a clean kind of canvas to work on top of. Okay, so now it's all clear. I'm going to take the dip pen again and dip it, and then start from the top corner again and start adding the shadow and tone. So I'm just thinking about where the light source is coming from. So in this drawing, it's sort of coming down from the top. I'm just adding more dark marks where I think the shadows fall in, increasing the amount of pressure and the amount of lines where the darker shadow sits on the leaves. And I'm sort of using a loose figure of 8 motion almost, and that sort of gives you a really nice organic feel to the texture. Think about where your shadows want to sit. So here I'm going to start bringing in collections of lines together, but these ones are going to be more structured, so it's less sort of fluid texture, and that kind of gives the sort of shape of a branch. With bigger kind of areas, what you can do is kind of feel your way around the shape of what you're drawing, and that will kind of add volume. If the branch sort of wraps around in this direction, you can kind of use the line direction to accent that. You haven't got the gradient like you would with a pencil, so you've got to sort of come up with a different way of creating shadow in an image. It's just collecting lines together into what you would call a hatch, and then that sort of acts as your shadow. Again, I'm just adding more tone to the leaves. On the underside of the shape, I'm adding more lines and more dark textures, and that gives it a little sort of almost 3D quality if you kind of focus on where shadows fall in and just fill in the gaps with those fine branches. Down where I live in Devon, I go out walking on the moor and just seeing the vastness of nature. It's just really inspiring. I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it's just something about being in nature and walking in nature and sitting and drawing in nature. It just speaks to me. I'm just going to leave this area here completely white and then add the tone here. And then it's just acting almost like a little highlight. And to create a tone, you kind of keep a equal distance between the line. When the eye looks at it from a distance, it creates almost like a solid tone rather than lots of lines. And then again, I'm going to just leave another white area here, and then that's going to act as a highlight to sort of mimic the shape of the trunk and where there's sort of lumps and bumps in it. And then on the furthest side, away from the light, I'm going to add really, really heavy lines. That's going to give the illusion that it's sort of a gradient of shadow getting darker and darker. I'm just adding a little bit of shadow here, just for the rocks around where the shadows fall in. So keeping the tops of the structure just completely bare of mark making. It's very easy to kind of put too much dark tone in too soon. And also if you don't consider sort of where your light sources are, you can quite easily add way too much tone and it just gets sort of too dark and too heavy. So now here, I'm going to add a little bit of cross-hatching, which is lines that are going to go the opposite way to the lines that I've created, and then that just adds a little bit more depth. So in areas like below the branches and leaves here, I'm going to add a little bit of shadow to the branch, and that's just using lines that go the opposite way. And then maybe here, there's darker shadows. And that just gives the illusion that you've got some gradient in the shadow, and you can sort of build up the depths. And again, on this part here, because it's furthest away from the light, I'm going to add some cross-hatching there. Okay, I think we're almost drawing to the end here. It's always good to kind of like just squint your eyes and look at the image, and if you've got reference material, you can kind of compare the two. See if they've got the same kind of feel, and you can also, squinting your eyes gives you a good way of just looking at it as a whole rather than focusing on too many details. And then you can sort of just review and see if there's anywhere else you just want to add a little tiny bit more tone or should be more shadowing and depth. Okay, I think I'm done. So I'm just going to rinse out dip pen there and just dry it on the cloth. There's my final illustration of a tree with a few gnarled and grizzled details. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to this channel. If you want to learn more about me and my process, check out my course on Domestika. You'll find the link in the description below.